that you're paying attention to which one you've opened and which one you're filling out, just so the right person gets your feedback. And just like with paper and pencil evals, the responses will all be anonymous and they will be delayed until final grades have been submitted. So just like before where they kind of went and sat in an office until grades got submitted, the same thing will happen here. We won't see our evals until grades are all complete. And then keep an eye out for a separate email from your TA that will focus on discussion and on her. So if you have any questions on either or on any of this process, let me know or let your TA know and we can help you out. We will send you a reminder or two. We just ask that you please make it a priority to fill it out. It won't take you a long time. But there are a lot of benefits to doing it online, but the drawback is that we don't have you sitting right here. We can't make you do it, right? And so we definitely really appreciate feedback from each and every student. And so I guess this is just my plea to fill it out. And if you forget to fill it out when you get my reminder, okay? All right, so moving into today's topic, relationships in the workplace, chapter 12, our final chapter, and our final chapter in the third unit on relationship types. Just to get your idea bank going, I want you to think a little bit about job. How many of you have had a job before or currently have a job? Raise them high, be proud. Yeah, okay. So hopefully we have a pretty good database here to draw from. So I want you to think about in what ways do your personal relationships at work affect your performance at work? In what ways do your personal relationships at work affect your performance at work? And on sort of the similar idea, but not exactly the same, how has a good or a bad relationship at work affected your workplace in general? How has a good or a bad relationship at work affected your workplace in general? So who can give me some examples of this stuff? Yeah.
My roommate and I work together at the gym, and we have a very good relationship, so we would get like distracted by like the bouncy ball or like exercise balls and like not pay attention to actually watching people in their safety.
Okay. Okay, good. Good. Well, not good, but good. Good example. And good that you're aware of it. Okay, so sometimes if we have a really good relationship at work, it might actually encourage us to screw around a little bit. Right? We're kind of more interested in hanging out with our pal. Okay, good. Others, yeah.
I work at a grocery store bakery, so I work with some particularly like old grumpy women. Okay. And there's one lady in particular who since day one, I've been there for 2 years, has like hated me. And we had like an okay relationship, but now she's back to like despising me. And it's to the point where like she does things that are like she blames on me that are so close to getting me fired. And I hate working with her. I hate seeing her. I hate being at work when I know she's there. And like I've been there for 2 years, so I shouldn't be dreading going to work, but I hate it. And like she just completely like changes the whole like mood and the workplace, and like I can't really do anything about it. So it's definitely a downer.
Yeah, excellent example. So how many of you can relate to that idea of having a job that theoretically you should enjoy, that should be kind of like a nice, fun job to be at, but there's somebody there that makes it really unpleasant and unhappy and almost makes you dread going to work? Have you ever had that happen? Yeah, it sucks, right? 2 hands. It's not cool, right? And it sort of seems like it should be separate from work, but yet it's totally not, right? Because this is somebody that you have to deal with maybe a lot, maybe just enough that it's annoying, right? But it can kind of bleed into your own productivity, your own feelings about work, and that sort of thing. Good. Other examples? Yeah.
I've been working at the same place for a few years, and we never had a manager. I was a swimming instructor, and we never had a manager for the swimming instructors. We just kind of like did our lessons, you know what I mean? And then they added a new position that summer for a manager to swim lessons to like come to make sure we're all on task or something. And she like made all these lesson plans, so it like messed up everything that I've been doing and all the techniques that I've, you know, come up with over the years.
Yeah.
And just like every time I went to work, I don't know, it's changed I loved my job so much. Like I love working with kids, and then she just kind of made it like you can't do that.
Yeah.
And
Sucked all the joy out of it.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. Good examples. Other thoughts on how relationships at work affect your performance at work, sort of affect overall climate at work. Have any of you ever dated a coworker? Be proud. Let's see them. Dated a coworker. Dated a boss. Dated an underling. Okay. Was that fun? Did you like it? Sort of? At first? Okay, so sometimes that can be sort of a fun perk at work, right? If you have somebody you have a crush on or somebody that you've maybe started to date, right? That can make work sort of fun and exciting, but then if things go south, that can be sort of yucky, right? Like, oh, I don't want to work, or I know we have to work on this committee together today and I don't want to see them, or that sort of thing. Okay, how many of you have ever worked with a really good friend? Wow, lucky, nice. So are these largely really good friends that you just happen to get a job with, or are these like really good friends that you developed a friendship at work?
At work.
At work? How many of you developed a really good friendship through work? Oh, good, I like it. Okay, which is nice, right? And I think not super uncommon. I guess it depends maybe a little bit on your line of work and how many people you get to interact with when you're at work, but I think it's relatively common for people. But I also think that's a really good reason for why we are talking about workplace relationships in a class like this, right? So when we are at work, interpersonal communication is kind of how everything gets done, right? Whether they turn into somebody who's a really good friend, or it's just sort of like strictly business, we're only talking about work stuff or whatever, or it's a client that you're just sort of getting to know over time. Interpersonal communication is how you accomplish things at work. It's how all the decisions get made, and when you build good relationships with people, it tends to make things run more smoothly. If you have bad relationships with people, it can really throw a hiccup into everything, right? Or make a deal die right there because you don't get along with the other person or something like that. So it can be a really big deal to think about how interpersonal communication functions outside of the typical ways that we've maybe been talking about all semester. We think about like, oh, our friends, or oh, our family, or our romantic partner. At work, there's a lot of interpersonal stuff going on as well. And of course, sometimes we're lucky, and when we're at work, we turn like an acquaintance into a friendship, right? Or maybe a really strong friendship or a romantic partner and that sort of thing. So it's kind of, I think work can be kind of this interesting blend of personal and professional sometimes. So with this context becomes a little bit of a gray area, but it's also kind of neat to think about different status levels and all of the different ways we try to maintain relationships at work, and maybe the different agendas we have because it's work, right? So I've heard a few examples already of places that you guys work. Can I hear some more examples of what do you do for a living? What's your job, either now or what's been a recent job of yours? Let's hear a variety of things. I heard a swim instructor, working in a bakery, working at your gym. Yeah.
Answering service operator, soccer, cashier,
Nice. Not all at the same place. Okay, good. That really ran the gamut. Excellent. Other examples. Where do you work, or where have you worked? What do you do? Yeah. Okay, nice. Good. Others? Yeah.
Working at dairy plant in summers, we make like all colors, customizations.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you know all the flavor secrets?
It's in research and development somewhere.
Okay.
I don't personally, they don't give me.
Okay. So we don't need to like shake you down after.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. Other places that you work or work? Yeah.
I work at the Gap.
At the Gap. Right on. Nice to work with the Gap. Do you have a folding board in your house?
What? No.
I do. I have a folding board in my house, and I love it. My drawers are very organized. Work at the Gap, and keep that with you. All right, good. Other places? Other places? What about, yeah? At H&M, nice. How many of you have worked in retail? Okay, how many of you have worked in food service of some kind? Good. How many of you have worked like in an office job? Cubicle-y kind of a job. Okay. How many of you have worked out of someone's home? Okay. How many of you have been someone's supervisor? Okay. Good. How many of you worked like some like manual labor stuff? Construction, fashion, landscaping, building awesome things. Okay, good, good. What am I missing? Major categories. Yeah.
CNA, healthcare.
Oh yeah, healthcare. Anybody? Healthcare field? Good, good, good. So, how many of you work with kids? that's a fun genre sometimes. Okay, how many of you work with grown-ups that act like kids? Alright, so we have kind of a nice variety, I think, which is good. I think that'll give us a good bunch of examples to draw from when we talk about sort of how workplaces are organized and how relationships work within them. But I think what's useful is just to kind of keep that in mind. Like, every workplace is different and is set up differently, and the relationships in them and the communication in them might kind of shake out differently. So just kind of start with the basics. There are a couple of things that really influence the relationships we have at work. And the first is organizational culture. So the culture of the organization can have an impact on the relationships we build within our workplace. And when we say culture, we kind of are talking about the same idea that we've been talking about all semester long with culture, right? It's a group of people who share beliefs in common and traditions in common and ways of communicating in common, right? And we've talked all semester long about the different cultural groups that you identify with and you belong to or you've been raised within and that sort of thing. And organizations kind of have their own culture as well. They do things a certain way, people there act a certain way or talk to one another in a certain way. And so organizational culture is sort of like the beliefs and practices that are specific to that organization. And organizational culture comes from a few different elements, or if we look at a few different elements, we can sort of get a feel for what the culture is. So the first would be the organization's values. So what is important in this organization? What do people in charge make a big deal out of, right? So in some places, high levels of performance might be a really strong value. In other places, it just might be like loyalty to the organization. Or in other places, it might be a strong value that we develop close relationships with our coworkers, right? So every organization has its own values. Another element would be the organization's norms. So just like we've talked a little bit about social norms throughout this semester, and organizations have their own norms too, right? So this is about, what kind of communication is appropriate or inappropriate? How do we talk to one another? What's sort of the chain of command that we follow? Those kinds of things. So how do we know kind of how to behave? We follow the norms of the organization. And sometimes if we change jobs, we have to kind of learn all over again, right? Because we're used to the norms or the rules from our old place, and we have to figure out what they are at the new place. And then the third thing that we can kind of glean a culture from would be the organization's artifacts, workplace artifacts. And this just means kind of what, like decorations almost, right? So what's the physical layout of the place? What kinds of things do they have on display? Is there a dress code that is specific to the organization? Those kinds of things. And some organizations have a lot of artifacts to draw from, and some are really like freewheeling, and there kind of aren't that many, right? And that can say a lot about the culture too. So in a culture that has 1 million artifacts, that might be 1 million rules to follow too, or there might be, kind of a certain way we do things. Whereas a culture or an organization that didn't have that many artifacts, maybe it's kind of a more laissez-faire kind of place, right? So if we look at the values and the norms and the artifacts, we get a feel for the organization's culture, which then has an impact on the relationships that we have. Another important feature that impacts workplace relationships beyond culture are the networks that are in place. So organizational networks, or networks in our workplace, deal with the links between various members of the organization. Links between members of the organization. And we can define networks in a few different ways. One thing that might be important to look at would be the nature of the information that's shared between people. So are you always only talking about work stuff, or is there work stuff as well as personal stuff? Like what topics are people talking about? What's the nature of the information? Another way we might look at organizational networks is by examining the channels that are being used. So some people's most organizations use email a lot. Some organizations don't use email at all, right? Some organizations interact mostly by posting a memo in the break room. Others only have face-to-face meetings, right? Some organizations have all of those different things, plus a few extras. So depending on the channels that you use, your network might sort of feel different, right? And there's also something called virtual networks, which are when you have the members of your network that are linked solely through things like email, right? So if you think, for example, of like, let's say there's a new magazine and it's a little baby company and they don't have a real headquarters or anything, and all of the writers are freelance writers and they live all around the country. So they have all of their meetings over email or maybe like through Google Hangout or something like that, where they're just Skyping with one another, doing everything virtually. So their network would be like a virtual network. Does that make sense? They don't have like a physical spot to like all go have a meeting together. So they just do everything virtually. So that would be one way to think about channels. And then the other one is density. And so if we look at the density of a network, what we're looking at is kind of like how many people in the network are also talking to how many other people in the network. So for instance, a really dense network might be one in which, let's say there's 20 people at your workplace, and all 20 people talk to all of the other 20 people. So everybody sees each other all the time, and everybody can interact with any of the other 19 people that they want. Okay. But a more loose network that wouldn't be quite as dense might have a lower frequency of connections or a lower number of connections, right? So maybe, maybe like this pretend magazine I just made up. Maybe everybody only talks through the editor-in-chief, right? Maybe the writers don't all talk to one another that much because there's not a whole lot of reason to do so, but most of them all just kind of check in with the editor. And so it's sort of a more loosely organized network as far as density. Does that make sense? Okay, and of course it can be anywhere in between there. But all right, and then the other thing I want to make sure we talk about just a little bit with respect to networks are cliques. And workplace cliques are dense networks. So this is a network that has a lot of density. And they're dense networks where the people share values and attitudes, especially maybe about work, but also maybe about life. So dense networks where the people share values and attitudes in common. And we are all familiar with the word clique, right? We use the word clique usually to talk about like the mean kids in high school sometimes, right? Like we're used to kind of thinking about cliques as like snotty kids or something. It has sort of a negative connotation sometimes. But it's not really meant to be that in this context. It just means these are people who see each other a lot, talk to each other a lot, and share a lot in common. And workplace cliques could be a good thing or could be a bad thing, right? So can you think of good examples of workplace cliques, or what would be like some benefits of falling into a workplace clique? Yeah.
You know, when I was working at Deli, there was a certain thing, and there was times that really fast and rough. I know I could depend on those people in it.
Yeah, for sure. So sometimes that's going to be, those are like your go-to helpers, right? Like those are people you know you can count on. They see things the way you do. You're in touch with each other often, so you know what's going on, and it's somebody you can rely on. Good. Other benefits of cliques that you can think of? Yeah.
If you're not able to come in for
Yeah, sometimes those are the people that you might be able to rely on when you can't do something, right? They can fill in for you, or they can help you solve a problem. Okay, good. And a lot of times, oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it doesn't seem like work when you're all just like hanging out or whatever.
Yeah, it can almost start to feel more like friends than work. Right, so maybe if you're part of a clique that's full of nice people, it can actually make work more enjoyable, which generally speaking is good for morale and retention and all of that good stuff, right? Productivity. So it can be a good thing. And when you're brand new at a job, sometimes it can be nice to find like the good clique, right? Because they can really help you figure out how to be the good kid at work, right? Like they can help teach you all the rules and the norms of the organization and kind of keep you on the straight and narrow, as it were, right? So, and I'm sure we can all think of possible negatives associated with cliques too, right? Like if they're a bunch of jerks or they don't get any work done or everybody hates them or that sort of thing, then maybe that's not the fun clique to hang out with. But they can sort of be good or bad depending on the people. So, all right. Any questions on just basics of workplace relationships with respect to culture and networks? With me so far? Okay. So, the rest of today we're going to talk about two different kinds of relationships at work. We're going to talk first about peer relationships, and then we're going to talk about mixed status relationships. So, peer relationships are relationships with people at work who have a similar level of status or a similar level of power to our own. So they maybe don't have the exact same job description or job title as we do, but they're sort of on our same level, if that makes sense. And there are different kinds of peers that we might have. We don't see every peer the same way necessarily. So there are a few distinct types that your text talks about. The first are the information peers. Let's see. So information peers are people that you talk to only about work stuff. And I like to kind of think about this as sort of similar to agentic friends that we talked about last week, right? So this is a very kind of task-oriented type of relationship. So information peers, your conversations are usually limited to work-related stuff. Very often information peers might be people who are like assigned to be together, like, okay, you four are on this committee, that sort of thing. And usually, with information peers compared to the other kinds we're going to talk about next, there's sort of lower levels of trust or lower levels of intimacy. Like these aren't people that we feel very close to necessarily. These aren't people that we're telling secrets to or going to for help or anything like that. It's sort of like get your tasks done and then go to lunch on your own. Then a step up from information peers would be collegial peers. And collegial peers are sort of, I like to think of them as sort of analogous to communal friendships that we talked about last time. So collegial peers are coworkers that we also consider friends. So with collegial peers, or coworkers that we also consider friends, we might be talking not only about work information, but also personal information. So we might self-disclose about our life outside of work, right? If we're having a problem with our mom, we might share it with them. Or if we are looking for a really cool idea of something to get our boyfriend for our anniversary, we might ask them for advice or that sort of thing. So we might talk about personal stuff as well as work stuff. And generally speaking, we have a more moderate level of trust and intimacy in these relationships. So we trust them with more information than like information peers, and we feel closer to them than we do to information peers. So people at work that you actually like and get along with and hang out with, maybe by choice. Okay. All right. Then the third type of peer is a special peer. Such a cute little name. But I would like you to go tell your special peers that they are special to you after today. See how they like that. But your special peers are, and we don't all have one necessarily, but your special peers would be if you kind of have like a best friend at work. Which actually a lot of you raised your hand and said you have, at least in the past, or maybe have one now, right? So a lot of you might have special peers right now. So go tell them. But a special peer is somebody that you feel very close to, that you go to for emotional support, that you are willing to give emotional support to if they need it. This is somebody you might talk to about serious things like career feedback and kind of work-related items, but also personal things. So you might have a best friend that you happen to work with, or you might have a friend that you develop a very close friendship with over time through work, but either way that would probably be somebody that you'd slot into this category of special peer. So usually we have a pretty high level of trust in these relationships. We usually have a pretty high level of self-disclosure in these relationships. This is sort of like your go-to person at work. We don't always have one, but it's nice when we do. And then the fourth type of peer can actually span any of these three categories we've talked about already. It's a virtual peer. So a virtual peer is someone who is on the same level as you, but you communicate mainly through virtual means. So it's not somebody that you see face to face very much, or maybe ever. Okay, but it's still somebody in your organization that is a peer. So you might have a virtual information peer, you might have a virtual collegial peer, you might have a virtual special peer. It depends just on how much you like them, how much you interact with them, how close you feel to them, and all of that jazz. So the virtual piece is really more about how you interact with what channels you use, and that sort of thing. Okay, make sense? All right. So let's talk a little bit about maintenance and peer relationships before we talk about mixed status. So when we consider maintenance and a peer relationship at work, we're really looking at a lot of the same maintenance strategies that we have become familiar with from chapters 10 and 11 already. So no new things to learn except for just applying them to this new context, right? So the maintenance strategies that tend to be kind of important for peer relationships at work are positivity, openness, and assurances. And they function in sort of similar ways as they might in friendship, or even in a romantic relationship maybe, depending on how much you like your peer. But positivity, of course, is just being a nice person, doing nice things for one another, right? Openness is being able to talk to one another, being able to self-disclose. And then assurances in this context isn't necessarily like I love yous, like we talk about in romantic relationships, but assurances with respect to maintaining peer relationships at work deal more with this idea that you see them as kind of a whole person, or not just a coworker, that they mean something to you, right? That you're there for them, they're your friend, you understand what they're going through outside of work too, right? So assurances might mainly come up when you're talking about personal stuff, right? So when you're dealing with collegial peers or special peers, you're probably more likely to use assurances than if you're just dealing with information peers that you have to chit-chat with at a meeting once a week. But you never know, it can come in handy. But the idea is just sort of that reassurance that you see them as a friend, as a whole person, not just sort of a generic robot at work. Okay. Now, a couple of sort of interesting lines of research that has come out of looking at peer relationships and how they are maintained deal with cross-sex peers, and in a moment we'll also talk about workplace romance. So cross-sex peers first. They have a lot of similar issues as cross-sex heterosexual friendships, which we talked about a little bit last week. So kind of that public presentation issue and that sort of thing. But one of the interesting things that people have started talking about more recently, and I don't really think it's a new concept, I just think it's something that people have named more recently and are talking about it more now, is your work spouse. Okay, so having a work wife or a work husband. How many of you have heard that phrase before? Work spouse or work husband, work wife? Okay. So, and it's one of those things where it's like starting to sneak onto TV shows every once in a while now. Like people are just sort of talking about it like it's a thing. And it usually doesn't mean anything romantic, right? It just is sort of like it's your special person, right? And so if you're both straight and it's a cross-sex relationship, it's like people just have to call it like your spouse, right? Like we're not very imaginative humans. So it is, now it's your spouse, right? So how many of you have ever felt like you had a work spouse? Cross-sex peer that was sort of like your go-to special friend. Okay, all right, yeah. I always joke that I think I have a literal work spouse because my husband works in this department. So I always feel like that's sort of cheating. But aside from him, I think I have a different work spouse too, but I think it's the same person that my husband has, so we have like a work. We both have the same work spouse. We share. We're very open and accepting, I guess. So I guess that's nice. I don't know, maybe if we had different work spouses and they didn't get along, it would be really difficult, so maybe it's nice that we share the same one. But anyway, so having a work spouse is basically like having a special peer, right, that just happens to be cross-sex. If you're both straight, then you get called a work spouse. I suppose you wouldn't have to be both straight to get called work. You know, anybody can be your work spouse. I don't care. That's my upshot. It can be a boy or a girl or a cute elephant. I really don't care. All right, so speaking of people being cute, So workplace romance is another area that tends to get a little attention when people like to study peer relationships at work. And the interesting thing is that most workplace romance takes place between peers, which is why we're talking about it here in the peer relationship section. But it seems like the ones that get the most attention are the workplace romances that occur like between the boss and the secretary, right? Like that's the cliche example, like, oh, you're sleeping with your boss to get ahead, or that sort of thing. Or somebody's cheating on their wife with the secretary, or something like that. Like those are always the salacious examples that we hear of. But the vast majority of workplace romance, I'm sorry, I don't remember if I have a little bullet. Yes, okay. The vast majority, 3/4 of workplace romances are between peers. So that's the much more common scenario. So what do you think are some of the pros and cons of workplace romance? Let's start with pros. Some of you said you've done it, so let me know what you think. Yeah.
I have an example. My friend works at a mill back home with his mom, his stepdad, his dad, and his brother and his stepdaughter. So they all work some of the same shift. And I mean, I guess it's good because it's like a family unit, but it's kind of awkward at the same time.
There's like an ex-romance and a current romance.
And both those romances happen
At work?
So, yeah, so like the divorce, everything, the new romance, everything happened.
Okay, all right, good, yeah, so I guess it's good they all still work there. They must be handling it okay.
I think it's union, so I don't know.
All right, so they're feeling good where they're at. Okay, good. Other benefits of workplace romance. Are there positive things about it? When you've been in one, what did you like about it? We'll get to the negatives in a minute, but there's got to be some good things. Yeah.
It kind of kept things exciting because you might not actually supposed to do that, especially if it was like different.
Yeah. So, okay, let's stay in peers for the moment. But yeah, like it can be sort of, you can have exciting times at work, right? Like, oh, let's be cute and meet for coffee on our morning break, and then I can give you a quick little kiss and we're working. Right? So it can be sort of that little mysterious little passion element, right? Of like kind of having this fun personal relationship at work. Okay, good. Other benefits? Really not? You don't need to just wax poetic about it for a little bit? Yeah.
Well, I guess you have to see them all the time.
Yeah, right? I mean, if you like them, which is the idea behind romance, right? If you like them, it can be kind of nice because you get to see them more often, maybe. I think, too, it can be really nice to know that they understand what you're going through all day and you know what they're going through all day, so it's sort of like a built-in sounding board for work stuff, which can be helpful and nice, right? But on the flip side, too, it might feel like you can never escape them or like you can never escape work stuff, right? Like it's harder to unplug. Okay. Other negatives about workplace romance? Some drawbacks. Yeah.
People complain about their significant others at work, and like there's this girl, she always talks to me and I can't get away from her. And she's like seeing this guy, but all at the same time, she's sleeping with 2 other people that I work with. And I know they're girlfriends, so it's just like I'm in this awkward position where I don't want to hear anything about it. And I just want her to shut up and go away, but like I have to keep hearing it and I don't know what to do.
Yeah, so it can be, depending on the people and depending on how they handle themselves, it could be, you could be put in a situation where people are sort of bringing gossip into the workplace, right? Like personal drama all the time. It's like, I don't really need to know about that right now. Like, it has nothing to do with work, and please just leave me out of it. Okay, good. What about if you break up? Blah, right? Like, that's no fun. Then it feels like one of you needs to quit, or you need to, like, totally change your shifts or something, right? A lot of times that can be uncomfortable. Or even maybe you don't break up, but you're going to fight. And now you have to go to work and stare at them all day, right? Like a lot of times when people get in fights with their partner, they get to like go to work and get away from the person all day. But instead, no, here you still are, and I still think you're annoying, and I'm mad at you, right? Or you might have people like picking sides at work, that sort of thing. So mixed benefits and drawbacks. I personally think it's pretty awesome because I married mine. But you know, you have to work on it and kind of keep that boundary between work and home sometimes can be really important. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about mixed status relationships.